It was an ordinary afternoon in the quiet, well-manicured neighborhood where the sun shone brightly over perfectly trimmed lawns and pristine homes. The streets were peaceful, almost too serene, the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other with smiles and small talk. In this idyllic suburb, everything seemed in place. But for Jessica, a determined mother in her early 30s, this tranquility was about to be shattered. She carefully steered her minivan into the parking spot outside her home, the wheels crunching on the gravel driveway. Inside the car, her daughter Maya, a sweet and resilient 10-year-old with a disability that often kept her on the sidelines of life, sat silently, watching her mother with an innocent, hopeful smile. She was used to the struggles. This wasn't her first time waiting for Jessica to park. But today, everything felt like it would be just another normal day. But that normalcy shattered the moment Karen, the neighbor from hell, stormed out of her front door. With her face twisted in fury, she marched toward Jessica's car, the distant hum of suburbia suddenly giving way to a tense, heavy silence. The camera lingered on Maya's face, her smile quickly fading into concern. Maya knew something was off. She could feel the tension building, even if she didn't fully understand it. As Karen reached the car, her voice cut through the quiet street, sharp and accusatory. "You're parked in my spot. How dare you?" Jessica, taken aback by the sudden confrontation, tried to remain calm. She had never encountered this level of hostility from Karen before. "I'm just parking here for a moment," Jessica said, her voice steady but tinged with confusion. "There's no one else around. I didn't realize—" "No, excuses." Karen's voice cracked with anger. "This is my spot, and I've had enough of your disrespect." The camera zoomed in on Maya's face, now visibly anxious, her eyes wide as she watched the verbal sparring unfold between her mother and Karen. She clutched the edge of her seat, her fingers trembling. There was something in the air, something that made her heart race faster than it had ever before. But this was no ordinary parking dispute. This was the beginning of a nightmare that would change their lives forever. The tension in the air thickened as Karen's voice grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the suburban neighborhood. She stood rigidly in front of Jessica's minivan, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, glaring down at Jessica with an expression of pure disdain. "I've told you before, this is my parking spot." Karen's voice was sharp, laced with a venomous edge. "You people think you can just break the rules and get away with it. You have no respect for anyone." Jessica, who had always prided herself on keeping a level head in difficult situations, forced herself to remain calm. She had dealt with much more than a parking dispute in her life, but Karen's aggressive tone and accusatory gestures made her pulse quicken. "I didn't realize this was your designated spot, Karen," Jessica replied, her voice steady but firm. "There's no sign, and besides, there were no other cars around. I'm just here for a few minutes, and my daughter needs me." Karen's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Don't pull that poor disabled child card on me. I've seen you park here before. You think you can do whatever you want, but you're not above the law. You're nothing but a liar trying to get away with breaking the rules." The words stung, but Jessica refused to back down. She turned to the minivan, where Maya was sitting quietly, her innocent eyes wide with confusion. Jessica could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. Maya had been through so much already, she didn't deserve this. She took a deep breath, hoping to calm her own nerves. "Karen, my daughter is disabled," Jessica said, her voice softening as she faced Karen again. "She struggles every day just to do basic things. Parking here is the least of our problems. I'm not trying to disrespect you. I'm just trying to get her settled." But Karen wasn't listening. Her anger seemed to boil over, her face turning red as her voice grew shriller. "I don't care about your problems. Rules are rules, and you're a liar. Everyone in this neighborhood knows who follows the rules, and it's not you." She pointed a finger toward Jessica, her arm shaking with rage. "I'm calling the cops. You're going to regret this." The words hit like a punch to the gut. The idea that this small confrontation could spiral out of control so quickly left Jessica breathless. She had faced battles before, but this felt different. The thought of the police showing up over something as trivial as a parking spot was absurd, but Karen wasn't backing down. And neither was Jessica. As Karen stepped away to grab her phone, ready to call the authorities, Jessica glanced back at Maya, who was watching with wide, anxious eyes. A flood of memories rushed through Jessica's mind. Memories of late-night hospital visits, of the countless surgeries and treatments Maya had endured just to have a somewhat normal life. Flashbacks of Maya's early years flashed before her eyes. The small, frail child in a wheelchair, struggling to speak or walk, the endless doctor visits, the look of uncertainty in Maya's eyes as she faced a world that wasn't built for people like her. Jessica had fought tooth and nail for her daughter's rights, constantly advocating for her, making sure she had the opportunities every child deserved. Every fight, every struggle had been for this moment, ensuring that Maya could live a life with dignity and respect. Jessica's resolve hardened. Karen's taunts, her disregard for Maya's condition, only fueled her determination. She wasn't going to let Karen's cruelty tear down everything she had worked for. Karen was back, holding her phone up with a smirk on her face. "I'm calling the police, and you're going to pay for this." Her voice trembled with malicious satisfaction. But Jessica stood her ground, her voice calm but unwavering. "Call them if you want, Karen. But you won't intimidate me. This ends here." Karen, stunned by Jessica's calm response, seemed to hesitate for a moment. But her anger quickly returned, and she raised her phone in the air, ready to dial. The camera focused on Jessica's determined face as she took a step forward, not to back down, but to stand her ground. The confrontation was far from over, and Jessica knew that this battle was only the beginning. The heated words between Jessica and Karen escalated to a point that neither of them could have predicted. Karen, red-faced and trembling with rage, stood just a few feet from Jessica's minivan, her fingers still pointed accusingly toward her. Her voice, sharp and venomous, echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "You think you can get away with everything, huh? Disrespecting me, disrespecting my rules. You're nothing but a liar. I've had enough." Jessica, her heart pounding in her chest, took a step back, trying to de-escalate the situation. She was aware that Maya, sitting inside the minivan, was watching everything unfold. She could see the fear in her daughter's eyes, the confusion that only grew as Karen's anger spiraled out of control. "Karen, please," Jessica said, her voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. "This is unnecessary. We're not doing anything wrong. I didn't know it was your spot. I'm just trying to take care of my daughter." But Karen wasn't listening. Her hands clenched into fists, and for a split second, Jessica noticed something strange in her eyes, a look that could only be described as pure malice. Before Jessica could say another word, Karen's hand shot into her purse, a movement so fast that Jessica barely had time to react. In a moment that felt like slow motion, Karen pulled out a gun, her fingers gripping it tightly, her arm trembling with adrenaline. "Stay out of my way," Karen shouted, her voice trembling but full of venom. Jessica froze, and then, in one terrifying instant, Karen fired. The gunshot rang through the neighborhood like a thunderclap, the loud crack breaking the silence and sending shockwaves through Jessica's body. Everything else seemed to blur around her as the horrifying realization hit. The bullet had struck Maya, her daughter, sitting in the passenger seat of the minivan. The world seemed to slow down. Jessica turned toward the car, her heart dropping into her stomach as she saw Maya's body jerk with the force of the shot. Maya's terrified scream pierced the air. "Mom, it hurts," she cried, clutching her arm. The blood began to seep through her sleeve as she sobbed, her face contorted in pain and fear. Jessica rushed to the minivan, her legs feeling like they were made of lead, her arms trembling as she reached for Maya. "Baby, no, no, please," Jessica screamed, her voice breaking. She tried to pull her daughter into her arms, but Maya winced, unable to move. Her entire body was shaking as she cried out in pain. Jessica's breath came in ragged gasps. The world around her felt as though it was closing in, everything suffocating beneath the weight of what had just happened. She looked up at Karen, who stood there, unmoving, her expression completely blank. "Karen, you shot my daughter." "You?" Jessica's voice faltered, her hands trembling as she held Maya close. Karen didn't flinch. In fact, she looked almost calm. "She was in my spot," Karen muttered, her voice cold and detached. "She was lying about parking there. She deserved it." Jessica's blood ran cold as she stared at the woman who had just taken her daughter's safety from her in a single moment of fury. Karen's face, devoid of any remorse, made Jessica's stomach churn. It was as if the act hadn't even registered to Karen. "Are you crazy?" Jessica screamed. But Karen merely stood there, eyes unwavering, as if this were just another everyday argument. She didn't apologize. She didn't show an ounce of guilt. Jessica, in disbelief, could barely grasp the gravity of what had just transpired. Her daughter, bleeding and crying, was all that mattered now. The confrontation was no longer just a matter of parking spaces. It was a fight for survival. The neighborhood, once so quiet and peaceful, had been shattered forever. The nightmare had only just begun. The piercing sound of sirens filled the air as the police cars arrived, their flashing lights reflecting off the pristine houses lining the street. Jessica stood frozen, her hands still trembling from the horror she had just witnessed, staring at her daughter, who was now surrounded by paramedics trying to stabilize her. The blood soaked through Maya's clothes, and Jessica could hear the soft, labored breathing of her daughter. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but the words wouldn't come. Her thoughts were a mess, a chaotic blur of emotions, shock, fear, anger, and desperation. As the officers took control of the scene, Jessica was separated from Maya, forced to stand off to the side while the paramedics rushed her daughter into an ambulance. The police began their usual procedures, cordoning off the area, taking statements from neighbors who had witnessed the chaos, and trying to make sense of the violence that had unfolded in this usually quiet neighborhood. Detective Elijah Pierce, a seasoned investigator with years of experience in violent crimes, stepped out of his car and surveyed the scene. His eyes immediately locked onto Jessica, who was standing near the curb, her face pale and her body shaking. He recognized the devastation in her eyes, and without a word, he walked over to her. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Pierce. I need to ask you a few questions about what happened here," he said, gently, his tone professional but empathetic. He could see the shock in her face, but there was something else there, too, a deep anger that simmered beneath her surface. Jessica nodded, trying to steady her breathing, her voice cracking as she spoke. "She shot my daughter," Jessica whispered, the words feeling foreign coming out of her mouth. "She shot Maya, and she did it on purpose." Detective Pierce nodded, his face serious. "I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me everything you can remember. What led up to this?" Jessica's mind flashed back to the confrontation with Karen, the fight over the parking space, Karen's yelling, and then the gunshot. She began recounting the events, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Karen came out of her house, screaming at me for parking in her spot. I told her I didn't know it was reserved, but she wouldn't listen. She just kept yelling. Then, out of nowhere, she pulled a gun. I didn't even have time to react before she shot my daughter. She shot her right through the window of the car." Detective Pierce listened intently, taking notes. "And Karen just left after that?" he asked. "No, she stood there," Jessica continued, her voice trembling with frustration. "She didn't even seem to care. She said Maya deserved it for parking in her spot. She called her a liar." The detective paused, his pen hovering over his notebook. "You're saying Karen shot your daughter because of a parking dispute?" Jessica nodded, her eyes welling up with tears again. "Yes, and she has a history of being difficult with everyone in the neighborhood. She's always been like this, controlling, rude. This isn't the first time she's caused trouble. People are afraid of her." Detective Pierce jotted down a few more notes. He had heard rumors about Karen in the past, how she had a reputation for harassing neighbors, making petty complaints to the homeowners association, and pushing her way through situations where she felt slighted. But this was different. This was criminal. As the investigation continued, Karen was brought in for questioning. She was calm, collected, almost unnervingly so. She denied everything, insisting that it was an accident. I didn't mean to shoot her, Karen claimed, sitting across from Detective Pierce in the interrogation room. I was just so angry. They always park in my spot. I didn't even know the gun was loaded. It just went off. Her words were as cold as they were unconvincing. She showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of the gravity of her actions. The detective's skepticism grew. "You're telling me you accidentally shot a child because you were angry about a parking spot?" he asked, his voice dripping with doubt. "I'm not saying it was right," Karen replied, her voice flat. "But she was a liar. She shouldn't have parked there. I've been asking her to move for weeks." She paused, her lips curling into a thin smile. If she hadn't been so stubborn, none of this would have happened. The detective's stomach churned at Karen's lack of empathy. This wasn't the first time he had encountered a suspect trying to justify their actions with flimsy excuses, but there was something about Karen that made it feel particularly sinister. While the questioning continued, Jessica, now at the hospital with Maya, struggled with the growing realization that the investigation wasn't going to be as straightforward as she had hoped. She had witnessed the shooting with her own eyes. She had seen the malice in Karen's eyes. Yet here she was, struggling to prove that this wasn't some tragic accident. Detective Pierce kept pushing Karen, trying to find cracks in her story. He dug into her background, questioning neighbors who had long been too afraid to speak up. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Karen had a history of bullying her neighbors, always finding reasons to complain, always trying to exert control over her surroundings. The local HOA had received multiple complaints about her behavior over the years. There were whispers of her using her influence to get what she wanted. Yet, there was still no solid evidence to prove that this was anything more than a heated confrontation gone wrong. As the hours passed and the investigation dragged on, Jessica's frustration grew. The police were having trouble finding enough evidence to charge Karen. There were no witnesses to corroborate Jessica's account of the shooting, and Karen's denial, combined with her calm demeanor, made it difficult to push the case forward. Jessica had always known the world wasn't always fair, but this felt like a direct slap in the face. Her fight for justice was only just beginning, but with each passing moment, it seemed more and more likely that Karen might slip through the cracks of the system. The system, it seemed, was designed to protect people like Karen, those who knew how to manipulate and control, who knew how to stay just inside the lines. And Jessica, who had spent her life fighting for her daughter's rights, knew she couldn't let this injustice stand. No matter what it took, she was determined to make sure Karen paid for what she had done. The investigation had stalled. Detective Pierce was running out of leads, and Jessica's frustration was mounting. Every piece of evidence she presented seemed to be met with skepticism. Karen had managed to weave a convincing story of an accidental discharge, and without concrete proof, it seemed like the police were willing to let her off the hook. Jessica's hope for justice was beginning to feel like a distant dream. Then, one late evening, while she was going through old photos in the living room, Jessica's eyes caught something on the shelf. It was a small, inconspicuous object, an old security camera tucked away behind a pile of family photo albums. She hadn't noticed it before. The camera had been left running for weeks, quietly recording the comings and goings of her front yard. A sense of urgency flooded Jessica's chest as she hurried to pull the device down. Could this be the break she needed? She grabbed the small SD card from a camera, her hands trembling, and rushed to her laptop to plug it in. The files began to load, and Jessica's heart raced as she scrolled through the footage. The moments leading up to the shooting were there, captured in full clarity. Karen's angry shouts, her threatening gestures, the brief pause before the gunshot rang out. But then the footage skipped. The audio cut out and the image blurred. Jessica clicked frantically, trying to recover the file, but it was no use. The video had been corrupted. She tried another method, hoping to salvage something, but again, nothing. The footage, the one piece of evidence that could turn the case in her favor, had been rendered useless. Her frustration boiled over, and she slammed the laptop shut. What was happening? Was this some cruel twist of fate, or was someone playing her? She could feel her hope slipping away, like sand through her fingers, But there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. Was this really just an accident? Or had Karen orchestrated this whole thing to make sure the evidence was gone? Determined to find answers, Jessica decided to dig deeper. She reached out to Detective Pierce again, urging him to look into Karen's history more closely. The detective agreed to investigate further and spent the following days speaking to neighbors who had long been intimidated into silence. What he uncovered sent a chill down his spine. Karen, it seemed, had been playing a much larger game. Over the years, she had used her position within the local HOA to manipulate those around her, forcing neighbors into compliance with her demands. But it wasn't just petty complaints and neighborhood squabbles. There were whispers about her connections to influential people within the HOA, possibly even ties to local law enforcement. Detective Pierce found that Karen's recent behavior had been escalating. Unprovoked incidents of aggression, unwarranted complaints about her neighbors, and even threats made in public settings. Her constant power struggles with the community had made her a pariah. But no one had ever dared to confront her head on. It seemed that Karen wasn't just fighting for a parking spot, she was fighting for control. Jessica listened as Detective Pierce detailed the disturbing information. It's becoming clear, he said, his voice grave. Karen's power in this neighborhood runs deeper than we thought. This isn't just about her temper. It's about something much darker. She's using her influence to cover her tracks in that footage. I wouldn't be surprised if she had a hand in tampering with it. The truth hit Jessica like a punch to the gut. Karen wasn't just a neighbor with a bad attitude. She was a woman who had manipulated her way into a position of authority, one that allowed her to get away with whatever she wanted, no matter who got hurt in the process. And now, her actions had turned her into a danger to Jessica and Maya, with the weight of this new information settling on her shoulders. Jessica realized that she wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She wasn't just seeking to prove that Karen had shot her daughter. This was bigger. It was about exposing the truth behind the facade of this seemingly peaceful neighborhood, a neighborhood where Karen's hidden agenda had been allowed to thrive unchecked for years. The battle for Maya's justice had become a battle for their dignity, their safety, and their right to exist in a world where power and manipulation didn't always win. The stakes had never been higher. The neighborhood that once seemed like a sanctuary was now a battleground, and Jessica was determined to fight for everything she and Maya deserved. The air in the interrogation room was thick with tension. Detective Pierce sat at the table, his eyes fixed on Karen, who was sitting across from him. Her posture was stiff, her fingers tapping nervously on the table, but there was an air of arrogance about her that made Jessica's blood boil. She stood just behind the detective, her fists clenched at her sides, fighting to keep her composure. This was it, the moment where the truth would finally come to light. The truth about the shooting, about Karen's lies, and about the dangerous woman who had almost destroyed her family. Karen, ever the picture of calm, leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a smile that made Jessica's stomach turn. "So, you think you can just twist the truth around and make me the villain, huh?" she said, her voice a mockery of innocence. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was an accident." Detective Pierce leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You expect me to believe that? You shot a child over a parking spot, and you're telling me it was an accident?" Karen's expression faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered, the smirk returning to her face. "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "She lied to me. She's always parked there, and I had to put a stop to it. She was disrespecting me and my property. It just happened. I didn't mean to," Jessica interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Stop lying, Karen. Stop pretending this was some accident. You shot my daughter in cold blood, and you knew exactly what you were doing." Karen's eyes flickered for a moment, and for the first time, Jessica saw a hint of fear behind her eyes. But Karen quickly regained control, her voice growing cold. "I'm not afraid of you, Jessica. You and your daughter have no idea what it's like to be disrespected, to have people think they can take whatever they want, whenever they want." Jessica stepped forward, her voice low and controlled, though her heart was pounding in her chest. You don't get to control people, Karen. You don't get to terrorize us just because you think you're entitled to something. You shot Maya for what? To teach her a lesson? Because she parked in your spot? You nearly killed her. Karen's smirk faltered again, but she didn't break. Instead, she looked down, almost as if she was considering the gravity of her actions. She needed to learn respect, Karen said finally, her voice colder than ever. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Nobody disrespects me like that. She's not the first one. I've had enough of people thinking they can walk all over me. That's why I did it. She needed to understand that you can't just do whatever you want in this world. There are consequences. Jessica's heart stopped as the realization hit her, like a freight train. Karen hadn't just shot Maya in a fit of rage. She had done it deliberately, coldly, calculatingly to send a message. It wasn't an accident at all. It was a deliberate act of violence. You're a monster, Jessica whispered, her voice trembling with fury. You don't get to make the rules. You don't get to decide who deserves to be hurt. Maya was just a child. She's been through so much in her life already, and you, Jessica's breath hitched as she fought to hold back tears. You tried to take everything from her. You tried to take her life because of your own sick sense of power. Karen's eyes hardened, and for a brief moment, she looked almost triumphant. People like me don't get what we deserve. We take what we want. I've been in control of this neighborhood for too long, Jessica, and I'm not going to let anyone undermine my authority. Detective Pierce had been quietly observing the exchange, but now he leaned forward, his voice firm. Karen, you've admitted to the shooting. You've admitted that it wasn't an accident and that it was intentional. You've threatened the safety of a child, and your actions have left a family broken. The air in the room was charged, the weight of Karen's words hanging heavily in the silence. Jessica's entire body trembled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. For so long, she had wondered if the justice system would fail them, if the law would allow someone like Karen to get away with something so horrific. But now, for the first time, it felt as though the truth was finally coming to light. Karen had no more lies to hide behind. The weight of her own words had exposed her for who she truly was. I'm done, Jessica said, her voice steady and resolute. Maya's not a lesson to be taught. She's my daughter, and you're going to pay for what you did to her. I won't let you get away with this. As the words left her mouth, a strange calm washed over Jessica. She felt her heart race, but she also felt a quiet sense of relief. The battle for her daughter's justice wasn't over, but this confrontation with Karen, this moment of truth, was a victory in itself. Meanwhile, Maya, who had been recovering in the hospital, watched the scene unfold on a news broadcast in her room. The courage she had shown in the face of her own suffering, the way she had fought through the pain, the fear, and the uncertainty, was now inspiring her mother to stand firm in this final moment of reckoning. Maya's strength had given Jessica the courage to press on, to fight for what was right, even when the world seemed to be against her. As the camera focused on Maya's face, her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of pride. Pride in her mother, pride in herself, and pride in the love that had driven her through this nightmare. Jessica turned to Detective Pierce, who stood up from the table, signaling that it was time to take Karen into custody. The detective's face was grim, but there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. We've got her, Jessica, he said softly. This is over. Karen was led away, her hands cuffed behind her back. But as she was escorted from the room, she shot one last cold look at Jessica. Her eyes were full of rage, but there was no longer any power behind them. The control she once wielded so effortlessly had been stripped away, and for the first time, she was the one who was powerless. As Jessica watched Karen leave, she felt a sense of relief flood through her, relief that justice would finally be served, relief that Maya's life had not been taken in vain. The fight wasn't over, but the battle had been won. The truth had been exposed, and the world could now see Karen for what she truly was, a woman who had let her need for control and her cruelty define her actions. And now she would pay the price. The courtroom was a sea of silence as Karen stood in front of the judge, her fate hanging in the balance. The trial had been long and grueling, but now it was finally time for the justice that Jessica and Maya had been fighting for. As the verdict was read, guilty of assault and attempted murder, Jessica let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The weight that had been pressing down on her for weeks, months even, was finally lifting. Karen's reign of terror had come to an end. Jessica sat in the courtroom, her heart still racing. She glanced at Maya, who sat beside her, her eyes tired but full of resilience. The scars of that day, both physical and emotional, would never fully heal. But they had made it through together, and that was enough for now. The jury's decision was a victory, but it wasn't the end of their journey, it was just a chapter closing. Karen's face, once so full of self-assurance and manipulation, was now a mask of defeat. She had fought to maintain control, to twist the truth, but now there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, her expression vacant, as though the person she had been, someone who had ruled with fear and intimidation, was no more. Her manipulative grip on the neighborhood was shattered, and Jessica felt a small, bittersweet sense of relief. The trial was a turning point not just for Jessica and Maya, but for the entire community. The neighborhood, once under the oppressive thumb of Karen's influence, began to rally behind Jessica. Neighbors who had long been too afraid to speak out against Karen now came forward, offering their support. The HOA that had allowed Karen to thrive in her toxic role was reformed, with new leadership focused on fairness, transparency, and respect for all residents. Karen's actions, once so hidden beneath a veneer of respectability, were now exposed for everyone to see. The power she had once wielded with ease was gone. As the days passed, Jessica and Maya tried to return to a semblance of normal life. The recovery process was slow, both physically and emotionally, but they were healing. Maya still had a long road ahead of her, but her spirit was unbroken. Every small step forward was a victory, and Jessica couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They had faced the unthinkable, and together they had emerged stronger. One evening, as the two of them sat together in the living room, Maya broke the silence. "Mom," she said softly, her voice still tinged with the weariness of her ordeal, "I'm glad we made it through, but I'm scared, too." Jessica turned to her daughter, her heart aching. She had watched Maya endure so much over the years, and seeing her now, still strong despite everything, made her prouder than words could express. "I know, baby," Jessica whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "but we made it through because we're a team, and no matter what, we'll keep going together." Maya nodded, her small hand resting in her mother's. "We're strong, right, Mom?" Her voice was quiet, but there was a determination in it that Jessica had never seen before. "We're stronger than ever," Jessica said, her voice firm with the kind of conviction that could only come from someone who had fought for everything they loved. "And we're going to keep going. We're going to be okay." In the weeks that followed, the community's support grew stronger. People who had once avoided eye contact with Jessica now greeted her with warmth and understanding. The transformation in the neighborhood was palpable. What had once been a place of fear and division was now becoming a space of unity and healing. Neighbors who had been too scared to stand up to Karen began to take pride in standing up for what was right. The power dynamics had shifted, and the sense of security that Jessica had longed for was finally starting to return. As for Karen, her time in prison was just beginning. She would face her actions in the harsh light of the justice system. The community had finally spoken up, and they would no longer let fear keep them silent. Karen's actions had cost her everything, but for Jessica and Maya, it was the beginning of something new. One afternoon, Jessica sat in her favorite spot by the window, watching as Maya played outside in the yard. It was a simple scene, but it was everything. The piece that had once seemed so fragile now felt like a solid foundation beneath them. Maya had begun to heal, slowly but surely, both physically and emotionally. Jessica knew that there would be hard days ahead, but she also knew they were no longer alone in their fight. The strength of the community, the support of their neighbors, and the bond they shared had turned their darkest hour into a triumph. As the sun set on another peaceful evening, Jessica took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they had endured. The road to recovery would take time, but they had already come so far. Maya was no longer just surviving, she was thriving, and together, they would continue to build a future where fear and injustice no longer had a place. The courthouse doors slammed shut behind them as Jessica and Maya made their way to the car. The weight of the trial, the verdict, and everything they had fought for still hung heavy in the air. As they walked to the car, Jessica glanced at Maya, her daughter now sitting silently in the passenger seat, her face a mix of exhaustion and relief. They had done it. The fight for justice had finally been won. Karen, the woman who had tried to destroy their lives, was facing the consequences of her actions. The courtroom had echoed with the sound of her conviction, and Jessica could almost feel the weight lifting from her shoulders. Maya was going to be okay. She had been through hell, but now they could finally move on. The car started, and Jessica drove slowly out of the parking lot, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street. As they left the courthouse behind them, Jessica couldn't help but feel a strange sense of finality. They had won, hadn't they? The journey was over, and Karen's reign of terror had come to an end, but as they turned onto the street that led them home, Jessica's eyes caught something in the rearview mirror that made her blood run cold. It was Karen's house, looming in the distance, its windows reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. And there she was. Karen stood outside on the front lawn, her arms crossed, her face twisted into a grimace. Her eyes were locked on Jessica's car, and the expression on her face was one of pure rage. Her mouth was set in a tight, furious line, and for a moment, Jessica felt a chill crawl up her spine. Karen's gaze was fixed on them, almost as if she were daring them to look away. Her expression was one of disbelief, surprise mixed with bitterness. She stood there, frozen, as if she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Jessica's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and she glanced at Maya. Maya, too, had noticed. Her wide eyes met her mother's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something unsettling about the scene, the stillness, the way Karen stood there like a statue, watching them with an intensity that sent shivers down their spines. For a second, time seemed to slow. Everything they had gone through, all the pain and suffering, all the battles they had fought, seemed to converge in that moment. It was over. The justice had been served. And yet there was something about Karen standing there, silently watching them, that felt like a threat that hadn't yet been fully realized. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. She glanced at Maya and said softly, "We won. It's over." But Karen's story isn't finished yet. Maya looked out the window, her eyes narrowing as she saw Karen standing motionless on the lawn. "What do you mean, Mom?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Jessica took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the tension. "Karen's not the type to just walk away. She's not going to take this quietly. We may have won today, but she's going to find a way to fight back. I don't know how, but she will." Maya's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded, her young mind processing the weight of her mother's words. She didn't need to understand fully. She just knew that Jessica had never been wrong when it came to understanding people like Karen. The car moved slowly down the street, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. But Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was still waiting to unfold. Karen, despite the conviction, despite the verdict, was not someone who accepted defeat easily. There was a darkness in her that hadn't yet been extinguished. Jessica's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She knew the battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Karen had made her own rules, manipulated and controlled for so long, that it would take more than a conviction to break her. As they drove farther from the courthouse, Jessica couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle deep in her chest. The final twist hadn't yet come. Something else, something bigger, was still out there, waiting to unfold. The late afternoon sun poured through the windows, casting a warm golden hue over the living room. Jessica and Maya sat together on the couch, their backs resting against the cushions, silently reflecting on the journey they had endured. The noise of the outside world seemed distant now, muffled by the heavy silence that hung in the air. Maya, her face more peaceful than it had been in months, leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. She had changed. Both of them had. The trauma of the past weeks, the shooting, the trial, the fear, and the uncertainty had taken its toll. But there, in the quiet of their home, they were finding a way to heal. Maya's small hand rested in Jessica's, a quiet symbol of the bond they had fought so hard to preserve. Jessica felt the weight of the past few months lift ever so slightly. There had been so many moments when she wasn't sure if they would make it out of this, when it felt like the world was conspiring against them. But now, sitting there with Maya, she felt the slow, steady comfort of normalcy beginning to return. It was fragile, like a flower pushing through the cracks of concrete, but it was there. "I'm proud of you, Maya," Jessica said softly, her voice full of tenderness. Her words carried more weight now, knowing how much her daughter had endured and how much she had grown. "You've been so strong through all of this." Maya lifted her head and smiled, a soft, sincere smile that reached her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You kept me going." Jessica squeezed her daughter's hand, a wave of gratitude sweeping over her. The battle had been long, and there were still scars, both seen and unseen. That would take time to heal. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Jessica could see a future where fear no longer controlled them. They had taken back control of their lives. They had fought for their peace, for Maya's safety, and now they were finally on the other side. The camera zoomed out slowly, capturing the two of them sitting side by side, a portrait of strength and resilience. Outside, the world moved on, but within the walls of their home, time had slowed down, offering them a moment of calm. Jessica looked out the window, her gaze distant as she thought about the days ahead. The challenges wouldn't stop. There would be more obstacles, more battles, but the strength they had found in each other would carry them through anything. As the camera continued to pull back, the message was clear. No matter what happened, no matter what the future held, Jessica and Maya would always have each other. Together, they could face anything that came their way. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. As the final chapter closes on Jessica and Maya's fight for justice, the battle doesn't end here. Their story is a testament to resilience, to the courage of standing up against injustice, even when the odds seem impossible. If you've been moved by their journey, we encourage you to share their story with others. Spread awareness, and let the message of strength and determination inspire those around you. Get involved in your community, stand up for what's right, and remember that even in the darkest times, change is possible. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and justice, and stay tuned for what's next in our journey. Together, we can make a difference.